Welcome, dear literature enthusiasts, to another gathering here at Frame Shift. It is always a joy to sit down with you, knowing that together we are not simply consuming movies, but unraveling them, pulling apart their fabric the way one might pore over a novel or a poem. Today, I'd like to turn our attention to a film that wears the trappings of superhero spectacle, but, at its core, carries with it the anxieties, yearnings, and philosophical quandaries of a Gothic fairy tale. The film is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, 2022. Before we dive deep, let me gently ask if you find these meditations as nourishing as I do, if you love peeling back cinematic layers until they bleed into literature and philosophy. Please like this video and subscribe. It means more than numbers to me. It means building a circle of minds that hunger for thoughtful, intellectual exploration. And to be clear, this isn't a review in a casual sense. What follows is not a checklist of likes and dislikes, but a deeply theoretical, critical analysis, written as though the film were a text we're studying together. Think of it less as commentary and more as conversation, an exchange among readers of the same grand, strange book. When I first experienced this story, I felt immediately that it was unlike the other tales in its lineage. Its tone was darker, more unsettling, infused with elements of horror that felt closer to Gothic novels or Baroque fantasies than standard heroics. I remember sitting in the theater, leaning back during those early sequences where dreams bleed into reality, and feeling that flicker of recognition, that here was something about nightmares and memory, something about the subconscious spilling into waking life. That sensation reminded me of when I first read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the way she described monsters not as intrusions, but as inevitabilities of our inner world. And it's why the film resonated with me, not because of its action or its visual spectacle, but because it tapped into the strange truth that our deepest horrors are often versions of ourselves. The narrative orbits around a man whose mastery of sorcery cannot shield him from the chaos of desire and fear. What he craves, control, certainty, and order, slips constantly from his fingers. Every spell he casts to contain reality seems to fracture it further. That paradox has always struck me as deeply human. How often in our own lives do we chase control only to discover that the tighter we grip, the more fragile everything becomes? I think of times in my own life where I wanted desperately to orchestrate outcomes, to bend time and chance to my will, only to find that life resists neatness. Watching this film reminded me of those struggles, of the futility of trying to master chaos, and yet of the strange beauty that emerges when we surrender. From its opening minutes, the film establishes a feverish energy. Dreams unravel into reality, and reality itself reveals its permeability. A chase across collapsing dimensions sets the tone. This is not a grounded tale, but one where laws are mutable, where gravity shifts, where the world can be as untrustworthy as our own subconscious. The cinematography revels in distortion, tilted frames, kaleidoscopic imagery, shifting palettes of neon and shadow. It feels like peering into a funhouse mirror of existence, one that dares us to question whether any version of ourselves is the real one. For me, those early sequences captured the sensation of anxiety dreams, the ones where you run but cannot move, where familiar places warp into uncanny versions of themselves. It was less like watching a movie and more like remembering a dream I couldn't escape. The heart of the story, however, lies not in these shifting landscapes, but in the characters caught within them. At its core, the narrative is about longing and corruption. A mother, desperate to be reunited with her children from another reality, twists her grief into obsession. Her arc is perhaps the most haunting. She is no cackling villain, no cartoonish force of evil, but a woman hollowed out by loss, willing to rend the fabric of existence itself to fill the void in her heart. Watching her, I felt the ache of grief made monstrous, and it reminded me of the way literature often frames desire, not as sin, but as wound. Think of Euripides' Medea, whose unbearable betrayal compels her toward destruction, or Milton's Satan, who twists pride into rebellion. Here, too, grief metastasizes into madness, and the multiverse itself becomes a metaphor for the infinite what-ifs of grief. What if I had chosen differently? What if in some corner of existence I was happy? The film balances this with the journey of its central sorcerer, who faces not only her wrath but also his own reflections. Again and again, he confronts other versions of himself, sorcerers who fell into arrogance, who twisted power until it consumed them, who sought control only to lose everything. These encounters are not merely plot devices. They're symbolic reckonings. Every variant is a mirror, every mirror a warning. As I watched, I thought of the way Dostoevsky often populated his novels with doubles, characters who embody potential selves, the shadow lives we might live if one choice had shifted. It struck me that this was less a story of saving the world and more a story of wrestling with oneself, of asking, who am I in the face of infinite possibility? The narrative structure leans heavily into gothic horror. Hallways stretch into darkness. Shadows twitch at the edges of frames. Corpses rise in grotesque parody of life. There is even a haunted book motif, the cursed tome whose pages promise power but devour the soul. That symbol resonated with me as a lifelong reader. The way knowledge itself can be a double-edged sword, how text can liberate or enslave depending on how we wield them. I couldn't help but think of Faust bargaining with his grimoire, of Victor Frankenstein scrawling through forbidden science, of all the literary figures who found that their hunger for forbidden knowledge brought ruin. The film's cursed book carries this tradition forward, a reminder that power without humility corrodes not just the world but the self. As the plot twists further into madness, the film becomes almost dreamlike in its pacing. One reality blurs into another. A utopia where the sorcerer is distrusted, a council of heroes that shatters under the weight of hubris, a ruined world haunted by one corrupted self. These settings are more than backdrops, they are allegories. The utopia reminds us that even peace can curdle into tyranny, that perfection hides rot. The ruined world whispers of what happens when arrogance consumes compassion. Watching these transitions, I thought of Dante's Inferno, the way each circle of hell reflects not just punishment but a truth about human sin. Each universe here feels like a circle of existence, each one reflecting a potential failure of the human spirit. The climax bends fully into horror. Corpses rise, shadows claw, screams echo in temples drenched in crimson light. And yet, amid the grotesque, there is tenderness too. The resolution does not come from overwhelming force, but from compassion, from recognizing grief, from acknowledging pain. The sorcerer does not simply defeat the mother-turned antagonist. He bears witness to her suffering, forcing her to see herself not as avenger, but as monster in her children's eyes. That moment carried immense emotional weight for me. It reminded me that often in life, confrontation is not about overpowering another, but about holding up a mirror, about allowing someone to see themselves clearly. It is literature's oldest lesson. Recognition is more powerful than destruction. There are moments in this film that unsettled me more than any other in its larger saga. Not because of gore or horror imagery, though there are plenty of both, but because of the way it forces us to reckon with grief and possibility. Watching the mother walk through a version of her own life, children rushing into her arms, only to see fear in their eyes, it was devastating. It reminded me of how sometimes our pursuit of love, if twisted by desperation, can become indistinguishable from destruction. In that sense, the film becomes less about magic than about the fragility of human desire. Thematically, what resonated most with me was the exploration of control versus surrender. The sorcerer begins the tale obsessed with mastery, believing he can bend reality to his will, that he must hold the knife, the scalpel, the spell. But again and again, he learns that control isolates, that surrender opens. By the end, his power is tempered by humility, his choices shaped not by arrogance, but by acceptance. It reminded me of the paradox I've faced in my own life, The times when letting go created more peace than holding on, when surrender was not weakness, but wisdom. Cinematically, the film embraces its strangeness. The director infuses it with flourishes of horror, jump scares, sudden violence, shadows that seem alive. But layered beneath these are moments of surreal beauty, cities folding into kaleidoscopes, rivers of memory flowing through corridors, music itself weaponized into battle. These images feel symbolic, as though the film itself were saying that art and chaos are siblings, that creation and destruction emerge from the same hands. As the credits rolled, I sat there reflecting not only on the story but on my own life. I thought of the griefs I carry, the choices I've made, the versions of myself that might have existed if I'd turned left instead of right. I thought of the times I've tried to control everything, and the times I've had to let go. That is what this film did for me. It reminded me that stories, when told well, don't just entertain. They awaken. They ask us to look inward. They force us to see that the multiverse isn't some far-off idea of infinite worlds. It's the infinite within ourselves, the many lives we might live, the many selves we might become. So, as we close this exploration, I want to thank you for being here, for diving with me into this labyrinth of symbols and themes. This was not a simple review, not a tally of effects or performances, but a reading of a film as if it were literature, a meditation on grief, identity, and surrender. If you felt stirred, if you found yourself reflecting as I did, then please subscribe. Join me here at Frame Shift, where we will keep treating cinema as text, as myth, as a mirror of ourselves. Because in the end, stories like this one remind us that the multiverse is not just madness. It is possibility. And in possibility, we find both terror and hope. Dreams open this story, not soft dreams, not the kind where memory lingers tenderly, but fevered ones, nightmares streaked with panic and urgency. We see a man running through a shifting space that does not seem entirely real, pursued by something monstrous, carrying alongside him a girl who feels both vulnerable and essential. She is terrified, he is determined, and the world around them is crumbling into shards of impossible geometry. This is how the tale begins, not with comfort, but with chaos. That opening dream is more than premonition, it is introduction. The girl's name is America, and she is unlike anyone the sorcerer has met before. Her ability is dangerous, raw, and ungovernable. She can tear open doorways to other worlds, but cannot control when or how they appear. Even within the dream, the desperation is not only about surviving monsters, but about navigating existence itself. It is a frantic chase across ruins of temples, pages of forbidden books swirling in the air, whispers of power and danger colliding. The man tries to save her, but in that dream space he fails. It is a haunting that clings to him even after he wakes, sweating and unsettled, unsure whether it was merely fantasy or something more ominous. Awakening thrusts him back into the life he knows. Ceremonies, obligations, the carefully controlled mask of dignity. Yet beneath the robes and rituals lies an unease that the dream has planted. Even in daylight, he cannot shake the sense that other worlds bleed into his own. This unease erupts violently when chaos comes crashing into his city. A monstrous creature, an eye at its core, grotesque limbs sprawling through the streets, emerges in broad daylight, tearing through glass and stone with terrifying force. Pedestrians scatter in panic as the sorcerer, robes fluttering, leaps into action. He conjures shields, glyphs, and whips of energy, fighting with a practiced precision that seems almost effortless. And yet, it is not enough. The creature is relentless, and it becomes clear that this is no random attack. It is hunting. Through smoke and screams, he sees her, the girl from his dream, but alive, tangible, breathing in his world. She is scrambling to survive, her fear palpable, and suddenly the nightmare feels like prophecy. With the aid of his old ally, Wong, he manages to subdue the beast in a whirlwind of sorcery, slicing tendons and binding limbs until the monstrous eye collapses in ruin. But victory feels uneasy. Standing before him is the girl he has already seen die in his dream. How can that be coincidence? The girl is distrustful, wary of his questions, and reluctant to trust him at all. She insists the monsters are not random. They're chasing her across worlds, seeking her power. Her gift, or her curse, is the ability to cross universes. She cannot control it, but it makes her both precious and vulnerable. The sorcerer, skeptical yet intrigued, realizes her arrival is no accident. He begins to piece together what the dream meant, that other versions of himself exist, and that she has known them. The suggestion is unsettling, doppelgangers not as theory, but as reality. Seeking answers, he turns to someone he trusts, or perhaps once trusted. Wanda Maximoff lives in isolation now, her home a pastoral illusion surrounded by orchards and blossoms. When he approaches her, it feels like returning to an old ally. He speaks of the multiverse, of the girl pursued by unseen forces, of the need for help. Wanda listens, her expression warm yet tinged with sorrow. She speaks of loss, of the children she once held in her arms, children who existed in one reality, but not this one. For a moment, the conversation feels like comfort between comrades, two weary souls trying to make sense of impossible worlds. But the veil slips quickly. When he mentions the girl's name, Wanda's tone hardens. She already knows. The illusion around her shimmers, and the orchard becomes something darker. The tainted glow of chaos magic, the twisted energy of the Darkhold Grimoire bleeding into her sanctuary. The realization crashes down. The one he sought as ally is in fact the pursuer. Wanda has embraced her identity as the Scarlet Witch, and she will stop at nothing to claim the girl's power. For in that power lies her chance to cross into another reality, to reunite with the children she lost. The revelation is chilling. Wanda is not asking, she is demanding. She offers him a choice: surrender the girl willingly or face her wrath. He refuses. The stage is set for devastation. The assault comes swiftly. Wanda descends upon Camartage, the fortress of sorcerers, with a fury unlike anything they've faced before. The temple's defenses rise, monks and sorcerers lining the battlements, glyphs shimmering in the air, protective spells cast across stone and sky. At first, it feels as though they might withstand her. But Wanda does not strike as an ordinary foe. She strikes as a force of nature. Her magic slices through shields, her illusions twist perception, her whispers pierce the minds of defenders until they turn on one another. The sorcerer and Wong fight valiantly, orchestrating defenses, guiding their allies, but Wanda is relentless. The walls crack, the ground shudders, screams fill the temple. In the chaos, America's fear surges uncontrollably, and a star-shaped portal tears open behind her. Wanda lunges, the sorcerer reaches, and in an instant, both he and the girl are pulled through the rift, tumbling into another world entirely. Wong is left behind, the fortress shattered, Wanda victorious yet empty-handed. What follows is disorienting wonder. They land in a world that looks almost like their own, but brighter, stranger, suffused with subtle differences. Skyscrapers are lush with greenery, traffic signals blossom into living flowers, and pedestrians stroll through streets that feel both familiar and alien. The sorcerer, ever calculating, studies everything with wary fascination. America, though still cautious, begins to open up, explaining fragments of her journey. She speaks of countless worlds she has traversed, of how each one holds a version of him, sometimes noble, sometimes monstrous. He listens, unsettled by the implication that heroism is not fixed, that in other universes he might not be savior but villain. Their exploration leads them to the sanctum of this new world, a structure both imposing and oddly somber. Inside, they find not the ally they expect, but a revelation. In this reality, the sorcerer they know is dead, memorialized as a hero who gave his life to defeat Thanos. His statue towers in the city, engraved with words of honor, yet the silence in the sanctum suggests deeper secrets. Here, they encounter Mordo, once an enemy, now apparently an ally in this universe. He greets them warmly, offering shelter and understanding. But beneath his smile lies suspicion. Over tea, tension simmers. The conversation spirals into distrust, laced with subtle traps of words. Then, suddenly, reality shifts. Both the sorcerer and America collapse into unconsciousness, betrayed by Mordo's hidden hand. They awaken imprisoned, confined within chambers of sterile glass and glowing force fields. The girl is isolated, observed like a specimen. The sorcerer finds himself shackled, his powers bound. It is here he meets the Council, the Illuminati, a gathering of heroes and leaders from this universe who claim to safeguard its order. They are regal, formidable, yet ominously confident. They reveal their truth. In this world, their Doctor Strange did not die nobly, but fell into corruption, his hunger for power threatening reality itself. It was they who judged him, executed him, and built the myth of his heroism to protect their world's faith. To the sorcerer now imprisoned, it is a chilling revelation. He realizes that across the multiverse, his greatest enemy may not be others. It may always be himself. While he absorbs this, a storm gathers outside. Wanda, through dark sorcery, has begun dreamwalking, inhabiting the body of her alternate self in this universe. It is a grotesque and terrifying act, her soul spilling into another's flesh, bending reality itself to her grief-stricken will. As she advances toward the Illuminati's fortress, the question is no longer whether she can be stopped, but how many will be crushed in her path. And so, the tale's tension tightens, a grieving mother turned monster carving her way across worlds, a sorcerer imprisoned by those who see in him only the shadow of corruption, and a girl who holds in her veins the dangerous possibility of infinite escape but cannot yet control it. The stage is set for destruction, and the first tremors of tragedy are already cracking through the frame. This is how the story builds its first half. Through dreams that bleed into reality, betrayals that turn friends into foes, fortresses that fall to whispers, and truths that reveal the hero as his own greatest threat. Each moment carries the weight of inevitability, and yet each also teeters on the edge of madness, reminding us that in a multiverse of endless possibilities, the line between savior and destroyer is always perilously thin. The walls of the Illuminati fortress hum with sterile power, their council gathered in solemn authority, certain they hold the truth in their grasp. The sorcerer sits bound, warned that he is more dangerous than he imagines, judged not for what he has done, but for what his other selves have wrought. He listens, his jaw tight, his heart weighed by the revelation that in countless universes, his thirst for control curdles into destruction. It is one thing to be mistrusted by enemies. It is another to be condemned by echoes of oneself. The council radiates confidence, but their arrogance blinds them. Even as they deliver their warnings, even as they recount how they themselves executed their world's version of him, a shadow is moving closer. Through the unholy tether of dreamwalking, Wanda seeps into this universe like ink through paper. She inhabits her counterpart's body, a mother tending children in a quiet home, until her eyes glaze with red and her form stiffens with another will entirely. When she rises, she is no longer nurturing. She is predator. The fortress is built on faith in its champions, but Wanda is not deterred. She tears through their defenses with brutality that is as swift as it is horrifying. Members of the council rise to stop her, confident in their powers, only to be unmade in grotesque fashion. Her wrath is not elegant. It is ruthless, unflinching, almost feral. What they saw as order shatters into carnage. The sorcerer watches, horrified, as those who imprison him fall in moments. The Illuminati, symbols of authority and hubris, become warnings written in blood. Underestimate grief at your peril. Amid the devastation, America remains the true prize. Wanda's eyes blaze with singular obsession, her every spell aimed at seizing the girl's power. The sorcerer fights desperately, not only against her, but against the inevitability she embodies. Together with Christine, a scientist from this world assigned to monitor him, he scrambles through shattered halls, pulling America from the brink again and again. Their escape is frantic, corridors collapsing, shadows chasing, spells clashing like thunder. It feels less like a battle and more like survival against a force of nature. The chase drives them deeper into the fabric of the multiverse. They tumble through star-shaped portals, spinning across realities that shimmer with surreal beauty and terror. One world flows like paint on canvas, another hums with neon geometry, another strips them into fragments of thought and shape. The sequence is dizzying, a reminder of how fragile identity is when stripped of a single universe. At last, they land in a place where the rules are fractured, where time collapses into ruins, and where whispers suggest that another version of him lingers, corrupted beyond repair. This is the realm of the Darkhold Shadow. Here, they encounter a sorcerer twisted by isolation, his sanctum crumbling, his eyes heavy with madness. He is the proof of what the Council feared, a man who sought to master everything and instead drowned in his own arrogance. His voice drips with bitterness, his movements sharp with paranoia. When the two versions of Strange confront each other, it is not spectacle but mirror. Everywhere between them is a duel of philosophies, one clinging to hope, the other surrendered to despair. Their conflict escalates, not through fists or flame, but through something more surreal, a battle of music, notes weaponized into shimmering blades and crashing crescendos. The very score of existence becomes their duel, each chord a clash of will. It is bizarre, beautiful, and profoundly symbolic. Order against chaos, harmony against dissonance, self against self. Victory comes not without cost. The sorcerer of hope triumphs, but the shadows of what he might become linger, staining him with fear. With Christine by his side, he reaches for the forbidden. To confront Wanda, to save America, he must wield the same corruption that has consumed others. He must dreamwalk, not into a living counterpart, but into the corpse of himself in another world. A grotesque choice, turning his own dead body into a vessel. It is a horrifying gamble, but desperation demands it. What follows is a spectacle of gothic terror. His corpse stirs, stitched together by will, face decayed, cloak woven from the spirits of the damned who rise, shrieking in protest. These spirits claw at him, whispering temptations of corruption, eager to drag him into ruin. For a moment, it seems they will consume him. But Christine intervenes, guiding him, reminding him of who he is, anchoring him in humanity. With her aid, he bends the damned into his allies, stitching their fury into wings of shadow. Thus armed, he soars toward the Scarlet Witch. The climactic confrontation is not fought in temples or fortresses, but in a shrine that pulses with dark energy, a place where Wanda believes her destiny lies. She is surrounded by carvings and flames, her eyes glowing with the hunger of grief turned violet. When the corpse Strange descends, cloaked in shadows and fury, their clash feels apocalyptic. Magic rends stone, screams split air, and amid it all, America's cries echo, terrified, unsure, desperate. The sorcerer knows he cannot defeat Wanda by force. He has seen too many versions of himself try and fail. So he makes a choice. He entrusts America with her own power. He tells her she is not broken, not cursed, but capable. It is the opposite of his earlier instinct to control. It is surrender, handing agency back to the one whose life has been nothing but flight. America steadies herself, fear trembling into resolve. And for the first time, she commands her portals. She delivers Wanda to what she most desires and most fears, another universe, another home, where her children live. But when she steps into that house, when she sees their faces, she realizes the horror of her path. They recoil from her, their fear raw, their cries piercing. She sees not a mother, but a monster. In their eyes, she becomes the very thing she sought to escape. The recognition shatters her. It is not battle that defeats her, but reflection. Grief forces her to see herself truly with trembling hands. She withdraws. She chooses to end the cycle, to destroy the Darkhold, to collapse the shrine, to bury her obsession in rubble. Her descent is framed in tragedy, not villain destroyed, but mother broken by love twisted too far. The shrine collapses around her, flames consuming stone, and for a moment it seems she is gone forever. As silence returns, America steadies, her portals closing. Christine lingers with the sorcerer, their bond tinged with bittersweetness. He knows she is not the Christine he loved, not the one he lost, but her presence has given him clarity. He confesses his truth, that his greatest weakness has always been the belief he must control everything. She smiles sadly, reminding him that letting go is not defeat. Their farewell is tender, framed by acceptance rather than longing. Back in his own world, the sorcerer walks the streets once more. The city hums with ordinary life, its people unaware of how close existence came to unraveling. He feels changed, not triumphant but tempered. His steps are slower, his gaze more thoughtful. And yet, the shadow of what he has done lingers. As he falls to his knees in the street, pain racks him. A third eye opens on his forehead, a mark of corruption, a symbol of the Darkhold's lingering stain. His scream is silent but piercing, a reminder that victory never comes without scars. The story closes not with neatness, but with echoes. America begins to train among the sorcerers, learning to control her power, her fear tempered into resolve. Wong, weary but steadfast, resumes his mantle as mentor and guide. The world spins on, but beneath its surface, threads of possibility shimmer. Universes still infinite, choices still uncountable, dangers still looming. And in the quiet after madness, we are left with truths not easily forgotten. That grief can twist into monstrosity, that control can corrupt as much as it protects, that surrender is sometimes the bravest act. The sorcerer has seen himself in mirrors across worlds, and what saves him is not strength but humility. Wanda has glimpsed her own face through her children's fear, and what ends her wrath is not defeat but recognition. America has learned that her fear is not curse but potential, her flight not weakness but power waiting to be claimed. The tale closes as it began, in dreams and madness, but within that madness lies something deeply human. It is not simply a story of magic. It is a story of mirrors, of grief, of surrender, of possibility. It reminds us that the multiverse is not merely endless worlds. It is endless selves. And what we choose in every version defines us. At the center of this tale is a man defined not only by his mastery of sorcery, but by the restlessness of his heart. His brilliance is never in doubt. His control of spells and artifacts marks him as one of the most formidable defenders of his world. But beneath the layers of confidence and arrogance lies a profound wound, the inability to accept imperfection. He clings to control as though it were salvation, believing that only through his hands can chaos be ordered, that only his choices can safeguard reality. What makes his journey compelling is not the power he wields, but the lesson he must learn, that surrender can be nobler than mastery, that trust can be stronger than command. Every variant of himself across the multiverse serves as a mirror of possibility, reflecting who he might become if ego triumphs over humility. His arc is thus not about defeating others, but about confronting himself, and the battle within is far more haunting than any clash of spells. One of the richest mirrors to his journey is Wanda. She emerges not as a caricatured villain, but as a woman hollowed out by grief, her entire being defined by the love she lost. The children she once cradled in her arms exist only in a reality she cannot inhabit, and her desperation to reunite with them corrodes her sense of self. She is both terrifying and deeply sympathetic, embodying the monstrous face of longing. Literature has often painted such figures. Medea, who destroyed to avenge betrayal. Miss Havisham, frozen in the ruins of her loss. Milton's Satan, who turned pride into rebellion. Wanda stands alongside them, a tragic figure who cannot untangle love from obsession. Her every act of violence is framed by sorrow, and her downfall comes not from defeat, but from recognition. Her children's fear showing her the monster she has become. She is the embodiment of how grief can distort desire, and her arc reminds us that love untethered from acceptance becomes destruction. America Chavez carries within her the paradox of power and helplessness. Her gift is extraordinary, the ability to pierce the veil between universes, to walk where no one else can. Yet she cannot control it. Her portals erupt from fear, making her power as much a curse as a blessing. Her life has been one of flight, tumbling endlessly through realities, never able to belong. What makes her arc so meaningful is the way it shifts from survival to agency. At first, she is object, pursued, coveted, defined by what others want from her. But slowly, through the trust of the sorcerer and the reflection of her own courage, she learns that she is not burden, but possibility. Her climactic control of her portals is not simply spectacle. It is the moment a child steps into her own skin, claiming not just her power, but her identity. In her, we see the universal struggle of adolescence, to transform fear into strength, to move from being acted upon to acting. She is, in many ways, the story's heart. Christine Palmer provides a quieter, but no less significant thread. She is not sorcerer or warrior, yet she embodies a strength the central character lacks: acceptance. She exists in multiple worlds, each slightly altered, but in all, she carries the same essential presence, the reminder of what he cannot control. His love for her is deep, yet it is also defined by impossibility. In her, he faces the lesson he resists most, that some things cannot be mastered, that not every wound can be healed. In the shattered universes, she becomes his anchor, the one who reminds him that surrender is not failure, but wisdom. Their bond is bittersweet, threaded with longing that cannot resolve. Yet that very incompleteness makes it meaningful. She symbolizes the truth that not every story ends with possession, that sometimes love's power lies in letting go. Wong, ever loyal, stands as counterpoint. Where the sorcerer chafes under restraint, Wong accepts duty as anchor. As sorcerer supreme, he embodies responsibility without arrogance, a quiet strength that steadies others. His role may not dominate the narrative, but his presence is essential. He represents the ideal that power can be tempered by humility, that leadership is not about dominance, but about service. Time and again, he is the one who grounds others, who persists through chaos not with brilliance but with perseverance. His arc is subtle, but it is a reminder that heroism often lives not in spectacle, but in steadfastness. The variants of Strange himself form a gallery of warnings. Each one embodies a path untaken, a shadow of possibility. One is corrupted by the dark hold, consumed by obsession until he destroys his world. Another falls into arrogance so profound that even his victories breed ruin. Each variant confronts him with a truth he resists, that his brilliance can easily curdle into tyranny, that his hunger for control can unravel everything he claims to protect. These doubles are not merely narrative devices, but symbols of the fractured self, echoing literary traditions of the doppelganger. They force him to confront not external foes, but the abyss within. His duel with one variant through weaponized music is emblematic. Not just a battle of spells, but a clash of philosophies, harmony against dissonance, self against shadow. The children, though appearing briefly, carry immense symbolic weight. To Wanda, they are everything: love, hope, meaning. But to us, they are reflections of innocence, of how love can curdle when twisted by obsession. Their terror when they see her corrupted form is devastating. In their eyes, we glimpse the truth. That even love can become monstrous when it refuses to release its grip. They are mirrors, too, showing not only Wanda, but us the cost of clinging too tightly to desire. The closing moments layer melancholy over resolution. Strange, walking through his city, appears triumphant, yet the emergence of the third eye marks him permanently scarred. This event is critical in how it reframes heroism. Victory does not erase corruption, it engraves it. The eye, symbol of forbidden knowledge, of truth glimpsed too far, lingers as a reminder that to wield power is to be altered by it. Critics saw this as bold, a refusal to end on clean triumph, choosing instead to acknowledge that contact with madness leaves residue. America's training at Kamar-Taj offers contrast. She is at the beginning of her journey, learning control where Strange has lost it. Together, these images suggest continuity. Power must always be tempered by humility, and every ending seeds another beginning. In terms of impact, the film polarized audiences. Some reveled in Raimi's horror flourishes, the grotesque deaths, the haunted reflections. Others recoiled, expecting standard spectacle and receiving gothic tragedy instead. Yet from a critical viewpoint, this polarization is evidence of its resonance. It is a film that risks discomfort, that insists grief and monstrosity share the same skin. Its emotional resonance lies in its refusal to soothe. It tells us that grief does not vanish, that control is dangerous, that love can destroy as well as heal. Looking back, each significant event contributes to this resonance. The dream as reality warns us that desire is perilous. The eye monster reminds us that surveillance and pursuit are unrelenting. Wanda's orchard to chaos reveals the fragility of facades. The fall of Kamar-Taj shows order undone by grief. The Illuminati's arrogance crushed warns against hubris. The multiverse sequence mirrors human contradictions. The music duel dramatizes the clash of self. The corpse dream-walking literalizes corruption. The recognition climax affirms agency and the tragedy of desire. And the third eye ending insists that scars endure beyond victory. Together, these events weave a story that is both spectacle and meditation, both horror and myth. Critics may debate its coherence, its handling of Wanda, its tonal excesses, but its thematic and emotional resonance is undeniable. It lingers because it does not comfort. It dares to suggest that grief is bottomless, that identity is fragile, that every choice is haunted by other possibilities. It is at its core a tragedy disguised as a superhero tale, a reminder that the multiverse is not just external but internal. Every self we might have been, every scar we carry, every surrender we resist. And in that, it becomes more than film. It becomes mirror, myth, and meditation, inviting us to see our own grief, our own obsessions, our own need for control reflected in its scarlet light. That is why it resonates, why it unsettles, why it endures. Every frame of this film feels deliberate, drenched in symbolism, haunted by shadows, and punctuated by bursts of terror that could only have come from a director with an eye for horror. Yet the story of how it came to life is far stranger than the film itself. What we see on the screen, polished sequences of multiverse collisions, sorcery, and grief, was born out of chaotic production choices, unusual accidents, and the idiosyncrasies of a filmmaker returning from a long absence. Behind the curtains, the making of this movie became its own strange journey, filled with improvisation, secrecy, laughter, exhaustion, and moments so bizarre that they almost feel fictional. When Sam Raimi was brought into the project, it wasn't with the calm of a settled plan, but the urgency of reinvention. The film had already shifted directors and writers, and the studio wanted something darker, stranger, something that would stand apart in a sea of spectacle. Raimi hadn't directed a film in nearly a decade, and yet he approached the project with the playfulness and chaos of a filmmaker still steeped in the ethos of Evil Dead. On set, his energy was unusual, sometimes quiet and reflective, sometimes erupting into bursts of eccentricity. He would hum strange melodies before takes, play unsettling music for actors, or whisper lines behind the camera to catch raw reactions. From the very beginning, secrecy became both a necessity and a burden. Marvel productions are notorious for their tight control over spoilers, but this film elevated secrecy to a paranoid art form. Scripts were printed with missing pages, or entire sequences were rewritten overnight. Elizabeth Olsen filmed scenes without being told exactly what her Wanda was doing, sometimes playing grief, sometimes rage, sometimes maternal devotion, only to discover later that these fragments were pieces of a larger tragedy. Benedict Cumberbatch spent weeks toggling between different variants of Strange with minimal guidance, often instructed only with enigmatic notes like, "This version has drowned in despair," or "This one clings to control too tightly." What emerged was a patchwork of performances that were stitched into coherence only in the editing room. The visual language of the film, tilted frames, grotesque close-ups, jump scares, and horror flourishes, was the product of Raimi's insistence on bringing his unique identity into a blockbuster machine. He drew heavily on practical effects, even when digital alternatives were easier. For example, the Undead Strange sequence was not originally intended to use prosthetics and puppetry. Cumberbatch assumed it would be largely CGI, but Raimi demanded makeup, cracked skin applied painstakingly, and a cloak of demons partially puppeteered by performers on set. Behind the scenes, this was chaos. Cumberbatch in zombie makeup, shadowy puppeteers flapping skeletal wings, Raimi laughing as though he were directing Army of Darkness again. The absurdity was not lost on anyone, but it gave the scene a tactile grotesqueness that digital alone could not provide. Elizabeth Olsen's experience was equally surreal. Playing Wanda in her most terrifying form, she found herself both empowered and unsettled by the process. In the scene where Wanda emerges from reflections, twisting her body unnaturally, Raimi used contortionists and practical stunts to craft movements that looked wrong to the human eye. Olsen described how even she found it difficult to watch playback, and yet Raimi would beam with delight, convinced that if the crew was disturbed, the audience would be petrified. Between takes, Olsen would crouch down in costume to reassure the child actors playing her sons, because they were genuinely frightened of her appearance when she slipped fully into Scarlet Witch mode. The juxtaposition, comforting children in between takes of horror, became one of her strangest memories. The Illuminati sequence became its own mythology within production. Castings like John Krasinski as Reed Richards and Patrick Stewart's return as Professor X were guarded with such secrecy that even much of the crew didn't know who would appear until the shoot. Krasinski's schedule was so tight that he filmed much of his performance in isolation, standing against green screens, only later stitched into scenes with others. Even the Illuminati, though fleeting in screen time, serve as thematic foils. They embody arrogance cloaked in righteousness, convinced that their judgment is absolute. They reveal that in their world, Strange himself fell into corruption, forcing them to execute him. Their presence underscores the central theme, that heroism and hubris are often indistinguishable until the cost is paid. Their swift destruction at Wanda's hands becomes symbolic justice, not only for their arrogance, but for the blindness of believing control guarantees safety. The Darkhold itself becomes almost a character, an embodiment of temptation and corruption. It whispers, it promises, it devours. In its pages is reflected humanity's oldest struggle, the hunger for forbidden knowledge. It is the Faustian bargain, the cursed text, the book that offers power at the cost of soul. Every character who touches it is marked, and in its destruction lies one of the film's central affirmations, that some knowledge cannot be wielded without ruin, that surrender is sometimes the truest act of power. Together, these characters form a tapestry of mirrors and contrasts. The sorcerer wrestles with his obsession for control, Wanda with her obsession for love, America with her fear of her own power, Christine with her acceptance of impossibility, Wong with his steadiness of duty. Each one reflects an aspect of the human struggle: control, grief, identity, humility. Their arcs intertwine, forming not merely a plot, but a meditation on what it means to live with desire and loss. What lingers is not just their victories or defeats, but their humanity. The sorcerer screaming as a third eye opens, marked by corruption even in triumph. Wanda collapsing in recognition of her monstrosity. America breathing steady for the first time as she controls her portals. Christine smiling sadly, embodying a love defined by acceptance rather than possession. Wong standing firm, weary but unwavering. Each of these images carries symbolic weight, reminding us that heroism is not perfection but persistence, not dominance but humility, not control but surrender. The character analysis reveals the true heart of the story. It is not about who wins or loses, not about which spell defeats which enemy, but about how each soul wrestles with its own fractures. It reminds us that in every universe, in every version of ourselves, we carry the same burdens. Grief that can corrode, power that can tempt, love that can blind, humility that can save. And in that recognition, the story ceases to be mere fantasy. It becomes a mirror, one that forces us to see ourselves in the eyes of sorcerer, witch, child, and mentor alike. Stories like this one arrive on the screen feeling inevitable, as though the images were always meant to be stitched into the fabric of cinema itself. Yet the reality is stranger, far more fragile. Behind the curtains of spectacle lies a series of improbable choices, surreal accidents, and eccentric anecdotes that shaped what would become one of the most peculiar entries in a grand saga. To look closely at the making of this film is to uncover a second story running parallel to the one we see, a story of secrecy, improvisation, and strangeness that lingers like whispers behind the final cut. From the beginning, this film's production carried a peculiar aura. It was originally conceived as a straight continuation of mystical adventures, but halfway through its early planning, a shift occurred. The tone turned darker, the scope bolder. The director chosen, Sam Raimi, had not helmed a film in nearly a decade, and his return to the chair brought with it his signature eccentricities, gothic shadows, sudden bursts of horror, and campy humor tucked into the corners of dread. The strangeness of hiring a filmmaker with both superhero and horror pedigree would become one of the film's most defining traits. On set, Raimi was known to blast loud music, often horror soundtracks or retro rock, just before takes, unnerving actors so they would carry a little chaos into their performances. He once startled the crew by playing eerie whispers over speakers during scenes of sorcery, wanting everyone to feel the Darkhold's corruption seep into their bones. The secrecy was suffocating. Actors were handed scripts with entire sections missing or pages rewritten daily. Some performers confessed they had no idea how their arcs truly fit until they saw the finished film. Elizabeth Olsen, who carried the emotional weight of Wanda's descent into grief-fueled monstrosity, filmed sequences without knowing which version of her character, mother, villain, or dreamwalker, she was embodying at the time. In interviews afterward, she admitted that she only pieced together the full journey months later in post-production screenings. Benedict Cumberbatch fared no better. At times he was instructed to play 3 or 4 variants of himself in the same shooting week, the director giving him only cryptic notes like "this one's broken by arrogance," or "this one has stared too long into the abyss." It was less acting than kaleidoscope, fragments stitched into one mosaic later. The Illuminati sequence, one of the film's most shocking passages, became a hub of surreal behind-the-scenes stories. The cameos were guarded with such intensity that even members of the crew were unaware of who would appear until the day of filming. John Krasinski, whose casting as Reed Richards ignited feverish fan debates, was reportedly added so late that his entire shoot spanned only a handful of days, much of it against green screens. Patrick Stewart's return as Professor X was shrouded in such secrecy that he joked about sneaking on his set like a ghost. Yet for all the gravity on screen, the reality of filming was often comedic. Actors delivering grave pronouncements in elaborate costumes while staring at tennis balls meant to represent Wanda's wrath crashing through the chamber. One of the strangest technical challenges came from the portals. America's star-shaped gateways looked seamless on screen, glowing with cosmic energy, but on set they were enormous, unwieldy rigs with lights so blinding that actors had to squint through entire takes. The crew nicknamed them the doorways to migraines. Young actress Xochitl Gomez recalled how difficult it was to balance fear and wonder when she could barely keep her eyes open in the glare. To help her, Raimi reportedly kept calling out encouragement from behind the camera, saying things like, "Think of it as the door to your wildest dream," and also the worst stomach ache. The absurdity helped break tension. Then there were the horror flourishes Raimi slipped in, some of which were improvised. The infamous sequence where Wanda crawls through reflections, snapping her body at impossible angles, was shot with practical contortionists twisted into positions so disturbing that some crew members walked off set between takes, unable to watch. Raimi, of course, delighted in it. He reportedly laughed during playback, remarking, "That's good. If the crew's scared, the audience will scream." The undead sorcerer climax carried its own strangeness. When Cumberbatch agreed to play his corpse-possessed self, he assumed much would be digital. Instead, Raimi insisted on prosthetics and grotesque makeup. The actor spent hours in the chair, face caked in cracked skin, his cloak built from puppeteered demonic spirits. Puppeteers crouched out of frame, waving skeletal wings around him, and at times he could barely keep from laughing at the absurd spectacle. The early confrontation with the eye monster in New York might at first seem conventional, a city under threat, a hero swooping in. Yet when examined critically, the event becomes something more. The creature, grotesque with its singular unblinking gaze, functions as a metaphor for surveillance, for the gaze that pursues relentlessly. That its target is America Chavez, a young girl embodying untamed possibility, reveals another layer. The multiverse itself is under constant scrutiny, its openness threatening those who would control it. The sorcerer's battle with the monster is not just spectacle, but an allegory of guardianship. He is fighting to protect, not simply a child, but the very idea of uncontrolled possibility. The way the eye is finally pierced is symbolic, the act of blinding surveillance, refusing the tyranny of being watched and pursued, reclaiming freedom for possibility itself. The revelation of Wanda as antagonist marks one of the film's boldest critical turns. In most genre conventions, the villain is an external entity. Here, the foe is one of their own, a hero turned inward, consumed by grief. The pastoral illusion of the orchard that crumbles into the red glow of chaos magic is an almost perfect visual metaphor. It embodies the fragility of constructed facades, how easily peace fractures when built on denial. From a feminist critical perspective, Wanda's arc can be read both tragically and problematically. On one hand, she is a rare portrayal of maternal grief given mythic scope. Her desperation to reunite with her children elevates motherhood to cosmic stakes, acknowledging its primal power. On the other hand, her descent into monstrosity risks reinforcing the trope of female hysteria, the dangerous woman undone by emotion. The film walks a tightrope here, its impact depending heavily on whether the audience sees her as sympathetic or villainous. What is undeniable is that her presence reshapes the narrative in a tragedy rather than adventure. She is not conquered by superior power, but by her own reflection, a distinctly literary mode of resolution. The assault on Kamar Taj is one of the most significant events, both narratively and symbolically. What should be the strongest fortress of order crumbles under the weight of Wanda's grief-driven wrath. Critics have noted the irony. Knowledge, discipline, and training are useless when faced with the raw, irrational force of maternal longing. The visual of sorcerer's spells, shattering under scarlet chaos magic, embodies the collapse of logos under pathos, reason undone by grief. From a mythological perspective, this echoes the destruction wrought by Euripides' Medea or by Demeter's grief in the Homeric hymn. When a mother is denied her child, even the gods tremble. The reception of this sequence was sharply divided. Some saw it as exhilarating horror spectacle. others as a troubling minimization of characters who had previously been portrayed as formidable. Either way, it stamped the film with a resonance rare in its genre, the reminder that order is fragile when grief becomes rage. The introduction of the Illuminati, too, deserves critical reflection. On the surface, it is a carnival of cameos, a gallery of alternate heroes designed to delight audiences. Yet their swift destruction at Wanda's hands reframes the entire scene. Critics argued that this sequence was Raimi's commentary on the futility of hubris. The Illuminati embody ultimate order, convinced of their ability to judge and contain any threat. They condemn Strange for his potential to corrupt, blind to the fact that their own arrogance is their undoing. Their gruesome ends, shocking in their brutality, function as cinematic punctuation. In the multiverse, power and authority offer no guarantees. This is perhaps the film's most subversive moment, stripping away fan expectations and leaving instead a brutal meditation on the vulnerability of supposed gods. It left audiences unsettled, both thrilled and horrified, its reception proof of how risk can polarize. The multiverse travel sequence, portals spilling into endless realities, invites critical analysis as allegory. Each universe glimpsed functions as a miniature parable. The paint world dissolves bodies into formlessness, a comment on the fragility of physical identity. The futuristic utopia, dripping with greenery, suggests harmony between technology and nature, yet is revealed to mask authoritarian control. The ruined universe haunted by sinister Strange symbolizes the consequences of unchecked ego. This kaleidoscopic passage is both spectacle and warning. Infinite possibility is both liberating and terrifying. Critics have compared it to Dante's visions in the Divine Comedy, where each realm reflects a moral truth. Here, the multiverse becomes not a playground, but a mirror of humanity's contradictions. Perhaps the most critically significant sequence is the duel between Strange and his corrupted counterpart, fought not with fists but with music. This battle, bizarre and whimsical, has drawn both ridicule and praise, yet encapsulates the film's deeper themes. Music is harmony, order, but also dissonance. To weaponize notes is to literalize the clash between versions of self, between harmony and chaos. The scene recalls romantic ideals of music as the purest expression of soul. Here, it is also a weapon, suggesting that even beauty can be twisted into violence. Some critics dismissed it as gimmick, but others praised it as audacious allegory. In either reading, it is unforgettable, a reminder that confrontation with self is always more surreal, more haunting than confrontation with another. The dream walking into a corpse is another moment of critical fascination. To inhabit one's own dead body in another universe is grotesque, gothic, and deeply symbolic. It literalizes the theme of corruption, that in order to defeat grief turned monstrous, Strange must embrace monstrosity himself. The image of his decayed face, his cloak woven from the damned, reads like pure Raimi, a marriage of superhero myth and horror excess. Critics saw in it echoes of Gothic literature's fascination with the uncanny corpse, from Shelley's Frankenstein to Poe's Haunted Revenants. It unsettles precisely because it confronts us with death animated, with the refusal of the body to rest. Yet thematically, it also mirrors Strange's inner journey. He must acknowledge his shadow self, embrace imperfection, and wield darkness without being consumed. The climax with Wanda and America resonates on multiple critical levels. It is not brute force that resolves the conflict, but recognition. America, once object of pursuit, becomes subject of agency, mastering her powers not because someone controlled her, but because someone trusted her. This shift is significant. It reframes the narrative as one of empowerment, of handing agency to the marginalized. Wanda, meanwhile, is undone not by defeat, but by her children's fear. The recognition scene is devastating, her longing fulfilled only to be revealed as monstrous. Critics highlighted this as both powerful and problematic. It gives her the dignity of choosing to end her rampage, but it also reduces her arc to maternal hysteria. Feminist readings diverged sharply here, yet the resonance of the moment is undeniable. It embodies the tragic truth that love without acceptance becomes destruction. Yet Raimi encouraged him to play it completely straight, reminding him that the humor and horror must bleed together. The oddity of playing a zombie version of himself, commanding shadow wraiths like a conductor of nightmares, left Cumberbatch describing it later as the strangest week of my career. Elizabeth Olsen, too, had her surreal experiences. The final confrontation, where her children recoil in terror, was emotionally devastating for her to perform. The child actors, genuinely unsettled by her performance in full Scarlet Witch mode, struggled to look at her during takes. To comfort them, she broke character between shots, crouching down in costume to play games or joke with them. She later admitted that this duality, terrifying them in one breath, reassuring them in the next, was one of the most bizarre balances she had ever struck on a set. The visual effects pipeline carried unusual hiccups as well. The multiverse hopping sequence, where Strange and America tumble through worlds of paint, cubes, and surreal distortions, went through countless iterations. At one point, there was a world entirely made of musical instruments, another where gravity inverted randomly. These were storyboard, partly rendered, then scrapped. Visual effects artists joked that they built entire universes only for them to be destroyed before release. The Paint universe, however, stuck, largely because Raimi found it hilarious. He laughed every time he saw it, insisting it remain. One little-known fact is that Danny Elfman's score became more than background. It became weapon. The music note duel between Strange and his corrupted variant was an invention born late in production. Raimi, working closely with Elfman, decided to choreograph an entire fight around animated notes plucked from sheet music swirling in the air. It was a nightmare for animators, who had to synchronize sparks of energy with chords of Beethoven and Bach. On set, Cumberbatch flailed his hands at empty air, trusting that months later it would transform into symphonic warfare. Critics later pointed to this as one of the film's strangest delights, a literal battle of music, born from a director's whimsy and a composer's indulgence. Not all the strangeness was intentional. The production schedule overlapped with pandemic restrictions, forcing reshoots under unusual conditions. Actors were often filmed separately, stitched together digitally in scenes that appeared seamless. In some cases, Olsen performed entire confrontations against empty green space, reacting to stand-ins who barely resembled her castmates. She later confessed it was both exhausting and surreal, pouring her heart into screams of grief and rage at a tennis ball taped to a stick. Even costumes carried peculiar stories. The Scarlet Witch's crown, delicate and sharp, proved so uncomfortable that Olsen developed bruises on her temples. The flowing cloak of Strange, heavy with hidden wiring for effects, weighed enough to strain Cumberbatch's shoulders after long days. Yet the most unusual costume belonged to the puppeteered spirits in the undead sequence. Performers wrapped in latex wings and skeletal masks, sweating under lights, embodying demons that would later become mostly digital. And then there's the trivia that borders on legend. Raimi, ever playful, included his longtime collaborator Bruce Campbell in a cameo as the hot dog vendor cursed to punch himself endlessly. The joke extended off-screen. Campbell claimed he continued the gag by sending videos of himself still punching to Raimi long after filming ended. Raimi also tucked in Easter eggs referencing his Evil Dead films, zoom shots, grotesque close-ups, even the Necronomicon's spiritual cousin in the Darkhold. Fans who knew his earlier work delighted in spotting the fingerprints of his horror past embedded in the fabric of the film. The ending itself underwent strange revisions. Early drafts had Wanda survive, retreating into obscurity, while others imagined America being taken under Strange's wing in a different way. Reshoots reshaped everything, pulling threads tighter, emphasizing recognition over combat. Olsen filmed multiple endings, uncertain which would survive. Cumberbatch recorded alternate dialogue for the final moments of corruption, some playful, some terrifying. In the end, the version chosen emphasized humility and surrender, but the ghosts of other possibilities still linger in the editing room. All of this strangeness, prolonged reshoots, bizarre improvisations, frightened children, migraines from glowing rigs, puppeteers flapping wings, coalesced into the film we know. And perhaps that is why it feels so peculiar on screen, why its texture is different from others in its universe. It is stitched not only from polished plans, but from accidents, indulgences, and Raimi's mischievous insistence on making a blockbuster feel like a haunted house. When I think of it now, I realize the strangeness is not incidental. It is the essence. This film exists in the in-between, between superhero epic and horror fable, between grief and camp, between meticulous planning and chaotic improvisation. The behind-the-scenes truths remind us that cinema is never inevitable. It is always a fragile miracle, stitched from bruises, laughter, terror, and improvisation. And in this case, those very oddities made the myth what it is, a tale of madness forged in madness itself. The opening sequence of this tale presents itself as dream. Yet dreams here are not safe harbors. They are ruptures, warnings, fissures through which other realities bleed. A frantic chase across collapsing architecture, a girl barely holding herself together, and a sorcerer who looks familiar but isn't. Already the film is signaling its intentions. From a critical perspective, this introduction announces not only the narrative's obsession with multiplicity, but also its horror-inflected tone. Unlike the orderly prologues of other superhero narratives, this one thrusts us into disorientation, telling us that the boundaries between self and other, reality and nightmare, will not hold. The fact that dreams are later revealed to be glimpses of other selves is a striking inversion of Freud's psychoanalytic dream theory, where Freud saw dreams as windows into unconscious desire. This film refigures them as actual realities, externalized and terrifying. It is a shift that positions the narrative as one less about psychology and more about ontology. What is real, and what version of self deserves primacy? Stewart's arrival was so concealed that he joked about sneaking in his set like a spy. The actors delivered grave lines about the sanctity of their universe while staring at tennis balls meant to represent Wanda's destruction, a detail that amused Raimi endlessly. What looked like gravitas on screen was often absurd in reality. Superheroes in elaborate costumes waiting for cues while sound technicians giggled at the incongruity. The portals created by America Chavez became another technical oddity. Their shimmering star shapes were beautiful on screen, but in reality, they were blinding light rigs with harsh edges that forced actors to squint through takes. Crew members called them the migraines because long hours shooting with the glare left everyone with headaches. For Xochitl Gomez, who was only 15 during filming, the process was intimidating. Raimi often called encouragement across the set, telling her to think of them not as machines, but as the doors to your greatest fears and greatest hopes. That mixture of terror and wonder found its way into her performance. The music duel sequence stands as perhaps the strangest anecdote of production. Raimi, working with composer Danny Elfman, came up with the idea late in the process. Instead of another sorcery battle of beams and shields, why not weaponize notes themselves? The fight was choreographed with Cumberbatch flinging his arms against empty air, trusting animators to later fill in swirling measures of Beethoven and Bach. Elfman reportedly loved the absurdity, composing fragments specifically to be hurled like daggers. Critics later called it audacious, divisive, surreal, but for those on set, it was simply hilarious. Actors and crew would snicker at the thought of a sorcerer battling another with symphonies. And yet, once completed, it became one of the film's most memorable images, a whimsical clash that could only have been born from Raimi's eccentric imagination. The pandemic, too, stamped the film with strangeness. Reshoots were required under strict restrictions, forcing actors to film separately in isolation. Olsen performed confrontations against green walls, imagining foes who weren't there. Cumberbatch sometimes acted entire dialogues with stand-ins who barely resembled his co-stars. The editing team later stitched these fragments together into seamless exchanges. For the actors, it was exhausting, pouring emotional intensity into what was essentially empty space. Yet the final cut hid these fractures so well that audiences could hardly tell. Even costumes carried stories. The Scarlet Witch's crown was so sharp and heavy that Olsen developed bruises from wearing it. Strange's cloak, laced with wiring to allow practical movement, weighed heavily on Cumberbatch's shoulders. But the strangest costuming belonged to the undead spirits in the climax. Performers were wrapped in latex and skeletal masks, their grotesque wings manipulated by wires. In the midst of serious battles, these performers would sometimes break into laughter, exhausted by the absurdity of flapping rubber wings for hours while drenched in sweat under studio lights. And then there was Bruce Campbell's cameo, or Raimi's signature. As the hot dog vendor cursed to punch himself endlessly, Campbell became both comic relief and inside joke. Offset, he continued the gag, sending Raimi videos of himself weeks later, still pretending to punch. For Raimi, inserting Campbell was a way of grounding himself. It was a nod to their decades-long collaboration, and a reminder that humor could always cut through horror. One of the lesser-known quirks of production came from Raimi's habit of startling actors. During intense scenes, he would suddenly shout or drop objects, catching them off guard. He believed that authentic surprise would translate more powerfully on screen than rehearsed reactions. Cumberbatch later admitted that some of his startled expressions were genuine, not scripted. Olsen, meanwhile, recalled how Raimi would whisper menacing lines in her ear just before cameras rolled, pushing her further into Scarlet Witch's descent. The editing process was its own labyrinth. The multiverse-hopping montage was originally much longer, including worlds made of candy, worlds of pure sound, even one where characters briefly became 2D sketches. Many of these were cut for pacing, but the remnants remain in concept art. Visual effects artists joked that they had built and destroyed more universes than gods. The ending, too, underwent metamorphosis. Early drafts had Wanda survive, retreating into the shadows. Others leaned more heavily on Strange's corruption. Reshoots reshaped everything, emphasizing Wanda's recognition of her monstrosity and Strange's surrender to humility. Olsen filmed multiple variations of her collapse, some more violent, some more tragic. Cumberbatch shot alternate endings where the third eye appeared with different tones, sometimes terrifying, sometimes almost playful. In the end, the chosen version leaned into unease, signaling scars that victory could not erase. Even the score carried oddities. Danny Elfman recorded orchestral segments that Raimi later spliced unpredictably, overlaying horror shrieks on his superhero beats. The result was a score that felt jarring at times, but deliberately so, echoing the chaos of the narrative. In recording sessions, Elfman encouraged musicians to push beyond tradition, asking them to play dissonant chords, to scrape bows against strings harshly, to create textures of unease. Some of these experimental tracks slipped into the background, heightening dread without audiences even realizing. Looking back, what is most striking is how fragile the entire production was. Between pandemic restrictions, constant rewrites, tonal risks, and Raimi's eccentric methods, the film could easily have collapsed under its own weight. And yet, out of the chaos emerged something distinct. A story infused with horror, tragedy, whimsy, and strangeness that could only exist because of the messy way it was made. The fun facts and insights don't diminish the myth, they enrich it. They remind us that what feels seamless on screen is often born of imperfection. Actors squinting under blinding lights, puppeteers sweating in rubber wings, directors scaring their cast for genuine expressions, secret cameos filmed in isolation, music transformed into weapons by sheer whimsy. The film is a miracle not of control, but of chaos harnessed. And perhaps that is the perfect reflection of its story. Just as the sorcerer learns that surrender is more powerful than control, the making of the film itself was less about rigid design and more about embracing unpredictability. Out of accidents, laughter, secrecy, and strangeness came a piece of cinema that feels haunted and alive. Its production mirrors its plot, a journey through madness that somehow finds coherence, not by erasing chaos, but by weaving it into the fabric of myth. From its very first frame, this film announces itself not as a simple continuation of a saga, but as a plunge into something darker, stranger, and more unsettling. Much of that impact does not come from dialogue or even performance. It comes from the world itself. The spaces we move through, the shadows that stretch across walls, the colors that bleed into one another like bruises, all conspire to give the story its texture. This is a film obsessed with place, with how environments reflect inner states of grief, ambition, and madness. To walk through its settings is to wander inside the psyches of its characters. The opening dream sequence is our first ascent. What we see is not simply an action set piece, but a landscape of crumbling architecture, suspended in a void that refuses the laws of gravity. Temples splinter mid-air, stone staircases curl into impossible spirals, and glowing runes burn faintly against a backdrop of collapsing space. The camera careens with frantic energy, handheld yet precise, tilting at sharp angles to mimic panic. In this space, setting becomes dream logic, unstable, volatile, terrifyingly impermanent. Its very geometry whispers of anxiety, of a reality too fragile to endure. The way the girl, America, stumbles across this crumbling world makes us feel her helplessness. The fact that Strange fights with such precision within it makes us feel his stubborn defiance against inevitability. Already, the film has declared its obsession with distorted spaces as mirrors of inner turmoil. When a monster bursts in New York, the shift is jarring. The mundane suddenly contaminated by the grotesque. Here the setting is familiar, streets bustling with ordinary life, sunlight glinting against skyscraper glass. Yet into that normalcy erupts the hideous eye-beast, its form so exaggerated that it feels like an intrusion from another reality. The destruction of a city street becomes not just spectacle, but a collision of two worlds, the ordinary invaded by the uncanny. Cinematography emphasizes this by alternating between wide shots that capture chaos, the monster smashing buses, glass shattering, and close-ups that linger on strange gestures, his hands etching symbols of power. The juxtaposition creates dissonance, the everyday and the surreal colliding in one frame. It is a visual thesis statement. The multiverse will not remain confined. It will bleed into what we know. Perhaps the most deceptive setting is Wanda's orchard. At first glance, it glows with warmth. Blossoms drift gently through sunlight, colors saturated with pastoral beauty. Cinematography softens here. Lingering shots, natural light bathing her face, camera movements unhurried. It feels idyllic, safe, even redemptive. Yet when the veil slips and the orchard dissolves in a scarlet haze, we see its true form. A wasteland corrupted by chaos magic, gnarled branches twisted into grotesque silhouettes, the very air shimmering with malevolence. This transformation is one of the film's most powerful uses of setting. It externalizes Wanda's duality, the mother longing for her children and the witch corrupted by grief. Critics often remarked on how this moment encapsulated the entire film's mood, beauty collapsing into horror, comfort masking despair. Camartage, the fortress of sorcerers, carries its own symbolic resonance. Its towering walls, carved with centuries of tradition, represent order and discipline. The cinematography here frames the fortress in wide, symmetrical shots, emphasizing stability. When Wanda attacks, the setting itself becomes battleground. Flaming scarlet bolts slam against golden shields. Monks scatter through courtyards once serene. Walls splinter beneath the weight of grief turned violent. The cinematography shifts to handheld chaos, destabilizing the sense of symmetry. The fall of Kamartaj is not only narrative but visual, the collapse of order under the pressure of raw emotion. It is a lesson told not through dialogue, but through stone breaking under scarlet light. The multiverse travel sequence stands as one of the most inventive explorations of setting. When America's powers hurl her and Strange across realities, each world flashes as miniature parables. A universe of paint dissolves their bodies into liquid swirls, cinematography flattening perspective to mimic abstraction. Another world hums with neon lines, geometric patterns sliding across skyscrapers. One strips them into cubes, fragmented like puzzle pieces. Each setting lasts only seconds, yet together they convey the infinite strangeness of possibility. Critics compared this to avant-garde art cinema, brief glimpses of realities that resist narrative but saturate atmosphere. It is not the detail of each world that matters, but the overwhelming sense of disorientation, the reminder that identity and place are fragile constructs. When they finally land in the alternate New York of Earth, 838, the differences are subtle yet unnerving. Streets are lined with greenery, buildings draped in living foliage. Pedestrians were clothing just a degree off from our world, patterns slightly more elaborate, colors slightly too saturated. The cinematography leans into this unease. Camera angles slightly tilted, colors brighter than natural, sound a half step out of sync. It feels utopian at first glance, but uncanny upon inspection. The city becomes a symbol of what the multiverse offers. Not wild fantasy, but eerie familiarity. A world just close enough to unsettle. The statue of Strange here looms as part of this setting. Heroic, solemn, carved in pristine stone. Yet the truth beneath that monument, the corruption and execution hidden by propaganda, gives the setting its true meaning. This is not paradise, but facade. The Illuminati chamber crystallizes this tension between order and fragility. It is vast, cathedral-like, marble gleaming, symbols etched into floors. The cinematography here is reverent, camera gliding smoothly across the chamber, elevating the authority of those within. Yet the setting is also a trap, sterile and unyielding. When Wanda invades, the chamber's solemnity becomes its weakness. Scarlet light floods the pristine white, and the space of judgment transforms into a tomb. Critics pointed to this as Raimi's deliberate satire. The grandiose setting of authority undone by grief's intrusion, hubris shattered amid marble dust. The ruined universe, where sinister Strange dwells, offers a different texture altogether. Skies swirl with storm, buildings stand half-collapsed. Oceans rise into the sky as if gravity itself has given up. The cinematography here revels in Dutch angles, frames tilted to disorient, shadows swallowing half of every composition. The setting externalizes despair, a world corroded by one man's arrogance. Inside the sanctum, candles burn endlessly, their flames casting distorted shadows on cracked walls. This space is claustrophobic, haunted, a shrine to obsession. Critics drew parallels to Gothic literature, noting the resemblance to decayed manors in Wuthering Heights or Dracula. The setting becomes the character, sinister Strange psyche made architecture. The duel fought through music in this space is enhanced by cinematography that literalizes abstraction. Notes swirl into glowing blades, chords burst into shattering crescendos. The ruined sanctum vibrates with sound visualized, the setting itself resonating with the duel. It is less a fight than a symphony, less combat than allegory. Harmony against dissonance, self against shadow. Without the ruined backdrop, it might have seemed whimsical. Within it, the duel feels tragic, a beautiful eruption amid ruin. The Shrine of the Scarlet Witch, with a final confrontation unfolds, carries mythic weight. Carved into mountain stone, its walls etched with symbols older than language, it radiates dread. Cinematography emphasizes verticality. cameras craning upward to make characters small against looming statues. Scarlet light drips from walls like blood, shadows pulse with menace. It is both temple and tomb, a place where grief is sanctified into monstrosity. The shrine's atmosphere presses down on everyone who enters, suffocating with inevitability. When it collapses, flames devouring its walls, the destruction feels not like victory, but like ritual sacrifice. The setting dies with Wanda's obsession, its fall symbolic of her surrender. The sequence where Strange dream walks into his corpse pushes the Gothic to its peak. The setting here is not only the physical battlefield, but the body itself. Decayed flesh, stitched together by magic, becomes stage. Spirits of the damned swirl through stormy skies, clawing at him, whispering temptation. The cinematography fractures, close-ups of grotesque teeth, wide shots of skeletal wings. The undead Strange soars not through clean skies, but through storm clouds, the setting itself writhing. It is horror transposed into heroism, a grotesque stage for the final confrontation. The choice of setting here, death itself, is Raimi's boldest stroke, insisting that victory must pass through monstrosity. Even smaller settings carry weight. The Sanctum's library, glowing with golden light, evokes order and wisdom, its towering shelves a symbol of knowledge's allure and danger. The memorial walls in the alternate universe, carved with endless names, function as a landscape of grief, silent yet overwhelming. The lakeside cabin, where Wanda's story closes in collapse, is intimate yet mythic, framed by mountains that seem to bow under tragedy. Each space is designed not just for function, but for resonance, carrying emotion in stone, wood, and light. Cinematography ties these settings into coherence. Raimi uses Dutch angles liberally to unsettle, framing characters against tilted horizons. He favors close-ups during moments of horror, eyes widening, lips trembling, recalling his Evil Dead days. Lighting shifts dramatically, golden warmth for hope, sterile blues for authority, scarlet for grief turned violet. Shadows dominate, swallowing half of frames, insisting that every moment of clarity is balanced by encroaching darkness. The camera itself becomes restless, gliding smoothly in scenes of authority, jerking frenetically in battles, twisting unnaturally in horror sequences. Critics noted how this visual language separated the film from others in its universe, giving it a texture that was more gothic fable than superhero spectacle. The sound design complements the visuals, transforming settings into living beings. The orchard hums with whispers beneath its blossoms. The ruined universe groans with wind and shifting stone. The shrine pulses with low rumbling like a heartbeat. Silence, too, becomes setting. The hush before Wanda's children recoil from her is as heavy as any soundtrack. These choices shape atmosphere as powerfully as visuals, immersing us not only in place but in mood. Taken together, the settings of this film form a labyrinth of mirrors and nightmares. Each one reflects the inner state of its characters. The orchard masking grief, Camartage collapsing under rage, the utopian New York hiding corruption, the ruined sanctum embodying despair, the shrine sanctifying obsession.